Well, that part I don't
No.
do anything.
Right.
So just below the Spanish-American soldier yelling out, as I mentioned, we have two nurses. We have a World War I and World War II nurse, some of the very active duties that the women had as far as involvement. And then we also have a MASH unit, so it's kind of hard to read from down here, but we do talk about the Korean War, and then we have the wind catcher of the Native Americans that the Native American doctor would have, and that is behind the World War I nurse. Next up we have the Marine Corps, and again now we go back again to 1775. And on the lower left-hand corner, just above the gentleman who's sitting there smoking a cigarette with his German Shepherd, you'll see a sign with sort of directions going all over the place, and those are little notations of famous landmarks, battles that the Marines were in, going back to Tongue Tavern, where founding in the Marine Corps, which would be November 10th, 1775, that's the Marine Corps birthday, and the Battle of Belleau in World War I, and Harper's Ferry during the Civil War. So there's a lot of different things there. If you read those different individual things, you will get an insight as to what's going on. Now, way in the background, we have Chapultepec, which is the big palace of Montezuma in Mexico City, and so that's where the song "From the Halls of Montezuma to the Shores of Tripoli" come from. And the Marine Corps, incidentally, is the only branch of service that has its own theme song of sorts. So we then move on to, again, as I mentioned, the signs talking about World War I. World War II, we have major emphasis by the most famous scene of all, of the raising of the flag at Mount Suribachi in February of 1945. And I'd like to comment that there is actual soil from Iwo Jima that was ground into the paint that is at the base of where they're planting the flag in on that scene. There was a gentleman, Charles W. Lindbergh, not to be confused with Charles Lindbergh, the aviator, who was actually one of the first flag raisers, and he made a revisit back to Iwo Jima in 1995 for the 50th anniversary and brought back some soil from Iwo Jima, which was then given to Doug Thompson and then finally to me. So I would just want to make note that very historic piece in the painting itself. From there, we also have a few other vignettes from World War II. Those are borrowed from old photographs. And then we move to the far right, and we have one of the last amphibious landings at Da Nang in the 60s by the Marine Corps. And on the beach, we see a fallen corpsman who is being worked on. And so the corpsman himself is in a World War II era uniform, and then we have the Vietnam era uniform on the gentleman fallen down. And that's sort of a pays tribute that many of the Vietnam veterans never really got. And I wanted to really emphasize that's a big healing process, and that's a very important part of the painting to me and to many individuals who served in Vietnam. And that again is why there's a lot of heavy emphasis, because then we flash back over to the left-hand corner where we have the gentleman sitting down with his cigarette and his dog next to him, because that's how a lot of messages were passed on. We get a good chance to see the kind of equipment that the Marine Corps men had during Vietnam. So right in the very front, you see a man with a full pack on. The guy sitting down has everything off. The guy in front just has his flak vest. It's kind of a little history of the uniform. And then as we slide to the center of the painting, you notice sort of a jungle motif, which is kind of takes us to the fact that going right back to the very beginning history of the Marine Corps, they have always found themselves in tropical climates, going back to the Revolutionary War, where they were in the Caribbean raiding the islands down there to steal arms from the British. In that same venue, we do see a skull and a femur and a mandible. Those are the MIAs, POWs, those that have been left behind that we do need to find. And the 45 laying in the sand is a tragic reminder that today there are so many suicides that are happening with veterans. And the idea there is to bury the thought, not yourself. That's why the shell casing is in the sand, to just, please do not use this gun. Then we move to these four figures on the lower right, and we have Major Holly Zabinski, who flies the Osprey. You see an Osprey up in the upper right-hand corner above her. She is in the Marines, obviously, and she's been a helicopter pilot from day one. Behind her is her father-in-law, who is a retired Vietnam combat fighter, Colonel Roy Edwards, who flew 297 combat missions in Vietnam. And then to comment on the ethnicity of the diversity that exists in the all of the branches. We have a young man, Quinton Sam, who is from the Mille Lacs Band tribal area right here just east of us. And then we have a Marine Corps man who is sort of looking away from everything. He's sort of pondering that no matter where you are, all of what is behind me is never left behind me. So it's just that constant memory that these veterans have. That's something that people really need to understand, that if you've been in this sort of combat area, it never leaves you. And then the medals below are those of Chesty Puller, who was the most decorated Marine Corps officer of World War II.
That was great.
That was about 4 3/4.
Okay.
They were pretty small.